My father looked me dead in the eye at my sister's Navy graduation dinner and called me the biggest disappointment of his life, saying I'd wasted my potential and become nothing more than a burden on the family name. Until Captain Robert Mitchell walked over to our table, looked directly at my father with confusion and said, "Sir, with all due respect, are you telling me you don't know your daughter is Admiral Elena Rodriguez?" I hadn't attended a family gathering in almost 5 years. Not since my mysterious departure from what they thought was a failed military career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Not since they discovered I'd been living under an assumed identity, not since my father turned my absence into proof of his parenting failures. The invitation came on expensive cardstock, my sister Carmen's commissioning ceremony as a Navy ensign. My stepmother's handwritten note at the bottom, "Time to face reality about your choices." The silence had been my protection for 5 years. Every phone call I didn't return, every family event I missed, every holiday where they wondered what had happened to their troubled daughter. I'd learned to let them believe whatever narrative made them comfortable, even when that narrative painted me as the family failure who couldn't handle military life. My father had made his opinion clear during our last conversation. "You had every advantage, Elena," he'd said outside the recruiting station after my supposed discharge. "Full ride to Naval Academy, brilliant mind, every door open to you, and you threw it all away. You couldn't even last 2 years in the Navy." What he didn't know was that I hadn't thrown anything away. I'd been recruited for something far beyond his understanding. Deep cover operations that required complete separation from my previous identity. The Elena Rodriguez who'd walked into his house after the academy wasn't the same Elena Rodriguez who'd walked out. That woman had been carefully erased, replaced by someone whose very existence was classified at levels my family couldn't comprehend. The small apartment I'd maintained in Norfolk had been my official address for 5 years, but it was just a mail drop and security cover. My real life happened in places my family couldn't visit, in situations they couldn't imagine, making decisions that affected global security while they wondered why I couldn't hold down a normal job. But what my family didn't understand was that I hadn't failed in the Navy. I'd succeeded so spectacularly that my achievements had to be hidden. 3 years after my academy graduation, I'd been hand-selected for Naval Special Operations Command, then promoted through classified channels to positions that didn't officially exist. The work had taken me to places that didn't appear on maps, conducting operations that wouldn't be declassified for decades. While my father was telling relatives that I'd washed out of military service, I was coordinating multinational task forces and briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff on matters of national security. My promotion to Admiral hadn't been announced in any newspaper or celebrated at any public ceremony. It had happened in a secure facility during a classified briefing where only 12 people in the world were authorized to know my true rank and responsibilities. My family wasn't among them. The irony was profound. While Carmen was celebrating her commissioning as the family's first successful military officer, I was already serving as one of the youngest flag officers in Navy history. While my father was mourning his disappointing daughter, that same daughter was commanding operations that protected the very freedoms he took for granted. For 5 years, I'd watched my family construct their narrative around my supposed failure. It was easier than explaining why their daughter had to disappear into a world they couldn't access or understand. It was simpler than revealing that their disappointment was actually serving at levels of military leadership they'd never imagined possible. Tonight, everything would change. Call it duty, call it destiny, but for the first time in 5 years, I decided to step out of the shadows and into a world that had written me off as their greatest failure. I wore civilian clothes. A simple black dress that could have come from any department store, paired with modest jewelry that gave no hint of my actual status. I walked into the Tidewater Country Club alone, past clusters of Navy families in their finest attire, ignoring the curious glances from those who remembered me as the Rodriguez daughter who couldn't cut it in the military. The ballroom was decorated with nautical elegance, anchor centerpieces, navy blue and gold bunting, and photographs of historic naval vessels lining the walls. There were assigned tables based on Carmen's Naval Academy class rankings and family connections. Her Annapolis classmates occupied the prime spots near the podium. Distinguished guests and Academy faculty filled the center section. Extended family and, quote, supporters were positioned toward the back. My place card was nowhere to be found among the official seating arrangements. A flustered event coordinator finally directed me to a small table near the service entrance, tucked behind a decorative pillar where the catering staff moved efficiently between kitchen and ballroom. No formal place setting, just a basic chair and water glass while everyone else enjoyed champagne service from crystal flutes. The message was unmistakable. I wasn't part of Carmen's success story, regardless of our shared DNA. I sat quietly, watching my family work the room with practiced social grace. My father, resplendent in his best suit, moved between groups of naval officers and Academy officials, introducing himself as, quote, Carmen's proud father, and sharing carefully edited stories of our family's military heritage. My stepmother, elegant in navy blue silk, graciously accepted congratulations on Carmen's achievements while carefully avoiding any mention of their other daughter. But I could feel the undercurrent of tension that always accompanied my rare family appearances. Someone at the Academy alumni table murmured just loud enough for neighboring groups to hear, "That's Carmen's sister, the one who dropped out of naval service. Such a waste after everything the Academy invested in her." Sympathetic nods followed. A woman I didn't recognize leaned toward her companion and whispered, "I heard she's been drifting for years. Never could handle the pressure of following in her father's footsteps." The comments accumulated like depth charges, each one designed to reinforce the family narrative that I was the cautionary tale that made Carmen's success more impressive. I'd trained myself not to react to these assessments, not to correct the record, just to endure whatever obligation had brought me back into their social circle. Carmen moved through the reception with confident grace, her new ensign uniform immaculate, as she accepted congratulations from Academy instructors and fellow graduates. She spoke knowledgeably about her upcoming assignment to naval intelligence, discussing career prospects and leadership opportunities with the fluent confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in military hierarchy. Meanwhile, I remained strategically invisible, present but unacknowledged, except when someone wanted to point out the family's contrasting outcomes. My father's colleagues began sharing their own children's military achievements, comparing prestigious assignments and rapid promotions. Their conversation flowed around accomplishments I couldn't claim publicly: classified operations, strategic victories, leadership roles that existed in spaces these civilian guests couldn't access or understand. The contrast was carefully orchestrated and deeply painful. Carmen's commissioning was meant to shine brighter against my apparent failure. Her dedication to service felt more valuable when measured against my supposed inability to commit to military excellence. I was the family disappointment that made everyone else's choices seem more admirable, the sister who'd received every advantage but lacked whatever character traits were necessary for sustained success. As the formal ceremony began and Carmen prepared to receive her commission, I realized I wasn't just attending as family obligation tonight. I was serving as living proof that Carmen possessed whatever strength, dedication, and leadership qualities I'd apparently lacked when faced with the demands of naval service. My father took the microphone with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades commanding respect in corporate boardrooms. His voice carried across the ballroom with polished authority, refined through years of presenting quarterly reports and motivational speeches to executive teams. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate Carmen's commissioning as a United States Navy ensign," he began, adjusting his tie with obvious paternal pride. He paused, scanning the room with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to holding an audience's attention. "Tonight represents more than just Carmen's individual achievement. It's a testament to the values that separate those who succeed from those who surrender when faced with real challenges." The room murmured approval. Academy officials nodded approvingly from the head table. Several naval officers leaned forward, recognizing the tone of someone about to reinforce the military values they'd dedicated their lives to upholding. "Carmen has shown us what it means to persevere through adversity," my father continued, his voice taking on the inspirational cadence he'd perfected in countless corporate presentations. "She faced the same pressures, the same demands, the same opportunities as others in her family, but she chose differently. She chose commitment over convenience. I felt every eye in the room subtly shift toward my corner table, though my father's gaze remained fixed on his appreciative audience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He didn't need to look at me directly. Everyone understood exactly who represented the alternative path, the cautionary tale that made Carmen's success more meaningful. I've learned as a father that true character reveals itself not in how we handle success, but in how we respond to difficulty, he said, his voice rising with practiced emotion. Some people crumble under pressure and walk away from their commitments. Others use that same pressure to forge themselves into stronger leaders. Several guests nodded knowingly. Carmen beamed from her position at the head table, clearly proud of her father's public recognition. My stepmother dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, moved by this celebration of their family's military heritage. Carmen chose the harder path when others might have chosen easier alternatives, my father declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. She chose active duty when others chose different directions. She chose to honor her commitments when others chose to abandon them. The applause started gradually, then built as the room recognized the implicit comparison being drawn. Someone at the Academy alumni table called out, "Hooyah!" in support of Carmen's dedication. More hands joined in celebration of her superior character and commitment to naval excellence. My father's voice reached its crescendo as he delivered his final judgment. "I want to thank Carmen for showing our family what it truly means to serve with honor. She's proven that success isn't about the opportunities you're given. It's about what you choose to do with them when no one is watching." He looked directly at me for the first time all evening, his expression mixing disappointment with resignation. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone we love is to stop making excuses for their choices and start celebrating those who made better ones. The crowd erupted in sustained applause. Officers throughout the room stood, recognizing my father's words as a celebration of military values and personal accountability. Carmen rose gracefully, accepting the ovation with the humble confidence of someone who'd earned every accolade. The applause. I didn't stand. I didn't applaud. I didn't leave like they expected me to. I just sat in my corner chair, watching 50 naval personnel and their families celebrate my father's public declaration that I was everything Carmen had chosen not to become. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was the family failure that made Carmen's achievements shine brighter, the daughter who'd received every advantage but lacked the character to honor her commitments when military service became challenging. Then the ballroom doors opened with the kind of precision that silences celebration like a sonar ping cutting through deep water. 3 figures entered in formation, Captain Robert Mitchell leading, followed by 2 officers whose insignia immediately commanded the room's undivided attention. Commander Sarah Chen from Naval Intelligence and Captain David Thompson from Naval Special Operations Command moved with the bearing of personnel accustomed to briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff on matters of national security. The casual conversation died instantly as every naval officer in the room snapped to attention, recognizing leadership that operated at levels most of them would never access. Even my father's confident smile faltered as he watched senior officers whose presence at a routine commissioning ceremony made no operational sense. Carmen stood frozen at the head table, her champagne glass suspended halfway to her lips as she watched her commanding officers cross the ballroom with unmistakable purpose. The Academy officials exchanged confused glances, clearly struggling to understand why Naval Special Operations Command would attend an ensign's commissioning dinner. But Captain Mitchell wasn't walking toward the podium where my father still held the microphone. He wasn't approaching the head table where Carmen sat surrounded by her fellow new officers. His polished dress shoes clicked against the marble floor with military precision as he made his way directly toward my corner table. The entire room held its breath, as 50 naval personnel watched a senior captain stop in front of the family disappointment they'd just been celebrating their superiority over. Captain Mitchell's presence commanded the kind of respect that made Naval Academy instructors feel like midshipmen again. He stopped directly in front of my modest chair, his expression unreadable as he studied my face with recognition that sent shockwaves through my carefully maintained civilian cover. The room watched in absolute silence as he came to attention before the woman they'd written off as a failed naval officer. "Ma'am," Captain Mitchell said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom with crystalline authority. "I wasn't expecting to find you here tonight." I rose slowly from my folding chair, my posture automatically shifting into the military, bearing that 5 years of deep cover hadn't completely suppressed. The room stared in stunned silence as I stood before one of the Navy's most respected special operations commanders. Captain Mitchell's expression shifted to something approaching professional deference as he glanced around the room, taking in the celebration that had just ground to a halt. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, turning to address the confused audience while maintaining his focus on me, "I believe there's been some confusion about tonight's guest of honor." My father's face went ashen as Captain Mitchell continued speaking with the authority of someone accustomed to delivering classified briefings. "This woman has been conducting operations at levels of national security that most of you aren't cleared to discuss." Commander Chen stepped forward, adding weight to Captain Mitchell's words. "Admiral Rodriguez has been serving in capacities that require complete separation from her previous identity. Her family was briefed that she'd left naval service for operational security purposes. The silence that followed wasn't quiet, it was catastrophic. I heard my father's microphone hit the floor with electronic feedback that made several officers wince. Carmen's champagne glass shattered against her plate, creating a cascade of crystal that seemed to echo through the suddenly airless room. Captain Mitchell looked directly at my father with the kind of confusion reserved for civilians who'd fundamentally misunderstood classified information. "Sir, with all due respect, are you telling me you don't know your daughter is Admiral Elena Rodriguez?" The question hung in the air like ordnance waiting to detonate, while 50 naval officers stared at the family failure who'd just been revealed as one of the youngest flag officers in Navy history. I maintained my composure with the discipline of someone trained to handle classified revelations in hostile environments. "Captain Mitchell," I said quietly, acknowledging his recognition while trying to minimize the security breach unfolding in real time. As the room slowly began to process what they'd just witnessed, Captain Mitchell continued speaking, but his words carried the weight of someone realizing that operational security had been compromised by family dysfunction. "Admiral Rodriguez has been conducting deep cover operations for Naval Special Operations Command for the past 5 years. Her family was provided cover stories to protect ongoing classified missions." He gestured toward Commander Chen, who stepped forward with the bearing of someone about to deliver information that would reshape everyone's understanding of national security operations. "The Admiral's work has involved coordinating multinational task forces and conducting operations that won't be declassified for decades. Her apparent departure from naval service was necessary operational cover." Captain Thompson nodded, his expression growing more serious as he surveyed the room full of people who'd just learned they'd been celebrating superiority over one of the Navy's most accomplished officers. "We're particularly concerned about how detailed family information about the Admiral's supposed failure reached public discussion tonight." That's when I caught it, the flicker of recognition mixed with terror that crossed Carmen's face. Not confusion about my true rank, but fear about something much more dangerous. She wasn't surprised to learn I was an admiral. She was horrified that someone had discovered her knowledge of my classified status. Captain Mitchell continued, seemingly unaware of Carmen's reaction. "Someone provided our security team with detailed reports about Admiral Rodriguez's family relationships and their potential impact on operational security. They seemed very knowledgeable about family dynamics and personal information that should have remained compartmentalized." My stomach dropped like a depth charge through dark water. My family had been told I'd left naval service, but they'd never been given specifics about my supposed failure or inability to handle military pressure. Those narratives had come from somewhere else, someone with access to information they shouldn't have possessed. Commander Chen pulled out a secure tablet, consulting what looked like security assessments. The initial family briefing was quite specific about maintaining operational cover through believable personal failure narratives. Someone requested detailed psychological profiles to ensure family reactions would appear authentic to outside observation. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications became clear. My family's disappointment hadn't been a natural response to my departure. It had been carefully orchestrated by someone who understood exactly how to weaponize their love against my operational security. Captain Mitchell's expression grew increasingly concerned as he continued reviewing his tablet. The security assessment emphasized that Admiral Rodriguez's family needed to believe convincingly in her failure to protect ongoing deep cover operations. Someone provided extensive guidance on how to maintain that illusion. Carmen was visibly shaking now, her new ensign uniform damp with perspiration despite the ballroom's air conditioning. She looked like someone watching classified information spill across an unsecured venue, knowing that her security clearance and naval career were about to become collateral damage. My father stood frozen at the abandoned podium, still holding his speech notes that had just declared me the family's greatest disappointment. His face showed the dawning realization that he'd been manipulated into publicly humiliating his own daughter, while she was serving at levels of national security he couldn't comprehend. Captain Thompson's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Admiral Rodriguez, we need to discuss how family operational security may have been compromised. This situation requires immediate classified briefing." The celebration had become a security incident, and someone in this room knew exactly why. Later, in the country club's private conference room, Captain Mitchell waited with Commander Chen, while Captain Thompson conducted a security sweep for listening devices. The celebration had been quietly suspended, with guests directed to enjoy refreshments, while routine naval business was conducted away from civilian ears. "Admiral Rodriguez," Captain Mitchell said once we were alone, "I didn't come here tonight expecting to blow your operational cover. There's something you need to know about how your family's narrative was constructed." My chest tightened with the familiar dread of operational security breaches. "What do you mean, Captain?" Commander Chen activated her secure tablet, pulling up classified correspondence that bore the markings I recognized from the highest levels of naval intelligence. 5 years ago, when you transitioned to deep cover operations, someone within the naval intelligence community provided detailed guidance on family management protocols. The words hit like a torpedo amidships. I'd assumed my family's reaction to my departure had been natural disappointment. The cover story about leaving naval service should have been simple. They'd been told I was pursuing civilian opportunities, nothing more. The concerning aspect, Captain Mitchell continued, is that someone provided your family with specific talking points about your supposed inability to handle military pressure. They were coached on how to discuss your failure in ways that would support ongoing operational security. He handed me the tablet, showing me communication records I'd never authorized. The sender was listed as Ensign Carmen Rodriguez, Naval Intelligence Liaison, with access codes that shouldn't have existed. My hands started shaking as I read Carmen's communications. "Admiral Rodriguez's family requires careful management to maintain operational cover. Recommend providing detailed failure narrative to ensure authentic disappointment responses. Family should believe she couldn't handle naval service to protect deep cover classification." "Carmen positioned herself as your family liaison," Commander Chen explained. "She provided extensive psychological profiles of your parents, their values, their expectations, and exactly how to manipulate their pride to ensure they would publicly express disappointment in your supposed failure." I stared at the screen, watching my sister's calculated manipulation dissolve into digital evidence. While I'd been conducting classified operations and wondering why my family seemed so thoroughly convinced of my incompetence, Carmen had been actively programming their responses. "The most disturbing element," Captain Thompson said, rejoining our group after completing his security sweep, "is that Carmen specifically requested access to your operational psychology evaluations and stress assessments. She claimed family coordination required understanding your actual mental state versus the cover story being provided to your parents." My stomach turned as the implications became clearer. "What kind of access?" Commander Chen scrolled to another section of the correspondence. "Carmen received detailed briefings about your actual assignments, your operational successes, and your classified promotions. She knew you were being promoted to Admiral 6 months before it happened." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Carmen hadn't been protecting operational security. She'd been using classified information to weaponize my family's love against my psychological well-being. Every family gathering where they'd expressed disappointment, every conversation where they'd questioned my choices, every moment of feeling like I'd failed them, all of it had been orchestrated by my own sister. We assumed family management was routine operational security, Captain Mitchell admitted. Carmen's report suggested you needed your family to believe in your failure to maintain psychological distance from your previous identity. We thought she was helping you. I handed the tablet back with trembling fingers. How did you discover she wasn't acting in my interests? When we tried to coordinate tonight's security protocols for your appearance at Carmen's commissioning, Captain Thompson said, she claimed you wouldn't be attending. She said family relationships were too damaged for you to risk exposure. That's when we realized something was wrong. Captain Mitchell's expression grew serious. Admiral Rodriguez, your sister has been conducting unauthorized psychological operations against your own family while using your classified status to justify her actions. That night, I returned to my secure facility outside Norfolk with Captain Mitchell's encrypted access codes and authorization to review the complete family liaison files. What I discovered in Carmen's digital archive made my classified operations in hostile territories feel simple compared to the complexity of my sister's domestic psychological warfare. Carmen's workstation revealed a systematic campaign spanning 5 years of family manipulation. She'd documented every family conversation, analyzed my parents' emotional responses, and calibrated their disappointment to maintain optimal psychological pressure while protecting her own rising naval career. In a classified folder labeled Operational Family Management, I found transcribed recordings of my parents' private conversations about my departure from naval service. Carmen had been conducting surveillance on our own family, documenting their genuine concerns and weaponizing their love to support her manufactured narrative of my failure. The communication logs showed the full scope of her deception. Messages to naval intelligence superiors describing the quote, necessity of maintaining family distance to protect Admiral Rodriguez's psychological stability during deep cover operations. Reports about my need for family disappointment to maintain operational commitment, and detailed assessments of how parental disapproval could be used to strengthen my dedication to classified missions. But it was the folder marked Career Protection Protocols that revealed Carmen's true motivation. She'd been monitoring my classified promotion timeline, my operational achievements, and my recognition within Naval Special Operations. Every advancement I'd earned had been carefully hidden from our family, while Carmen positioned herself as their military success story. One particularly damaging document was a psychological assessment she'd submitted to Naval Medical about my emotional dependency on family approval, and how my deep cover operations required therapeutic distance from civilian relationships. She'd convinced military psychiatrists that my family's disappointment was actually beneficial for my mental health and operational effectiveness. The most devastating discovery was a series of forged documents she'd created for our parents. Fake medical reports about my supposed psychological breakdown, fabricated discharge papers showing early separation due to inability to adapt to military discipline, and carefully crafted letters supposedly from my former commanding officers expressing concern about my diminished capacity for service. In her personal files, I found detailed psychological profiles she'd compiled about my emotional triggers, my responses to family disappointment, and my methods of coping with isolation. She'd been studying me like an enemy operative, building a comprehensive intelligence file that treated her own sister as a target for manipulation rather than a family member deserving protection. But the folder that destroyed any remaining possibility of reconciliation was labeled Long-Term Strategic Planning. Inside were projected timelines for my eventual return to civilian life, detailed scenarios for managing my transition back to family relationships, and contingency plans for managing Admiral Rodriguez's expectations regarding family reception upon declassification. Carmen had been planning for the day when my operations would end, and my true rank would be revealed. Her strategy involved positioning herself as the family member who'd maintained relationships while I was away, ensuring that she would be credited with preserving family bonds during my absence. One draft memo to our parents, scheduled for delivery after my eventual return, read, Elena's work required complete separation from family for national security purposes. I maintained operational liaison to ensure family unity could be preserved for her eventual homecoming. Her apparent failure was cover story to protect ongoing classified missions. The dates on these files revealed that Carmen had been planning to take credit for protecting our family relationships, while simultaneously destroying them. She'd engineered 5 years of parental disappointment, then positioned herself to be the hero who revealed the truth and reunited our family when it served her purposes. My own sister had been conducting a complex psychological operation that treated my emotional well-being as acceptable collateral damage in her campaign for family prominence and career advancement. The next morning, I found Carmen at the Naval Station Norfolk coffee shop, where she always reviewed classified briefings before her 0800 intelligence meetings. She was scrolling through secure communications on her tablet, probably managing the operational security crisis she'd created at her own commissioning ceremony. When she saw me approaching with a classified folder and Captain Mitchell's authorization tablet, her face went ashen beneath her perfectly applied regulation makeup. "Elena," she said, quickly securing her tablet and forcing a smile that couldn't hide the panic in her eyes. "I didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be dealing with the security fallout from last night's unexpected revelations." I sat down across from her at the small steel table, placing the classified folder between us with the precision of someone conducting a hostile interrogation. The coffee shop buzzed around us with morning routine, officers grabbing coffee before classified briefings, personnel reviewing daily security protocols. But our corner felt isolated, like we were sitting in a SCIF conducting sensitive operations. "Carmen, I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the fury building behind my professional composure. "Have you been accessing my family liaison files without proper authorization?" Her coffee cup rattled against the metal table as she set it down too quickly. "That's an odd question, Elena. You know I work in naval intelligence, not family services. Why would I have access to your personal liaison records?" I opened the folder and spread the first set of classified printouts across the table. Screenshots of her unauthorized database queries, timestamps showing repeated access to my operational psychology files, copies of family management reports she'd submitted without my knowledge or consent. Because someone with your security clearance has been very busy conducting psychological operations against our own family for 5 years. Carmen's eyes darted to the documents, then to the coffee shop exit, calculating extraction routes like we were in enemy territory. I watched her process the evidence, weigh cover stories, search for operational angles that might salvage her position. "You accessed classified materials without proper authorization?" she asked, her voice rising with false indignation. "That's a serious breach of operational security, Elena. Just because you're having some kind of paranoid episode about family relationships doesn't give you the right to—" "Paranoid episode?" I interrupted, pulling out the second stack of evidence. "Is that what you call discovering that my own sister has been conducting unauthorized psychological warfare against our family while using my classified status as cover?" I slid Captain Mitchell's tablet across the table, showing her own communications describing our parents as operational assets requiring careful management to maintain Admiral Rodriguez's psychological distance from civilian relationships. Carmen's face went gray as she recognized her own words recommending that our family's disappointment be maintained for my supposed operational benefit. "Carmen, you convinced Naval Medical that our parents needed to believe I was a failure to protect my mental health during deep cover operations. You weaponized their love to serve your own career advancement." She leaned back in her chair, her naval intelligence training finally overriding her panic. "Elena, you have to understand this from an operational perspective. Your deep cover required complete separation from previous identity. I was facilitating that transition by managing family expectations, by programming them to be ashamed of me, by maintaining operational security." Her voice cracked with frustration, drawing stares from nearby personnel. "You disappeared into classified operations and couldn't maintain family relationships yourself. I was protecting both your cover and their emotional well-being." I pulled out the most damaging evidence: her forged documents, her surveillance recordings of family conversations, her long-term plans for taking credit for family reunification. Were you protecting them when you created fake medical reports about my psychological breakdown? Carmen stared at the papers like they contained live ordnance. Her mouth opened and closed without sound. Finally, she found her voice. You needed complete separation from civilian identity, Elena. Maintaining family connections would have compromised your operational effectiveness. My operational effectiveness wasn't your decision to manage. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service formal review was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the Pentagon's secure briefing facility. I sat in that windowless conference room, surrounded by flag officers, intelligence directors, and legal personnel, while Carmen's desperate attempt to justify her actions was being presented to the review board. She'd filed a comprehensive operational security report, claiming that her family management protocols had been essential for protecting my deep cover operations and maintaining national security. Her written defense, read aloud by the investigating officer, painted her unauthorized psychological operations as patriotic duty rather than family betrayal. Admiral Rodriguez's deep cover operations required complete psychological separation from previous identity. Carmen's statement continued. Family disappointment was a necessary component of operational security, designed to protect both classified missions and civilian family members from potential hostile targeting. Each word felt like a court-martial, where the defendant was rewriting national security protocols to justify personal manipulation. The review board exchanged concerned glances, clearly struggling with the implications of unauthorized psychological operations conducted against a flag officer's own family. Until the conference room doors opened, and Admiral Patricia Wells entered, followed by Captain Mitchell, and a figure that made every officer in the room snap to attention. Secretary of the Navy James Harrison, whose presence at a routine personnel review meant this case had escalated to the highest levels of naval command. If I may, Admiral Wells said, approaching the classified presentation screen with a folder bearing markings from the Office of Naval Intelligence's most sensitive operations. I'd like to address the scope and authorization of family liaison protocols. With some recently declassified operational data, the room's attention shifted from Carmen's justification to Admiral Wells's presentation. As she began displaying intelligence reports, operational timelines, and psychological assessments that revealed the full extent of Carmen's unauthorized activities, Ensign Rodriguez conducted unauthorized surveillance operations against Admiral Rodriguez's family for 5 years, Admiral Wells announced. These activities included forged medical documents, fabricated discharge papers, and psychological manipulation designed to serve personal career advancement rather than operational security. She clicked to the next slide, showing communication logs between Carmen and various naval intelligence departments, where she'd misrepresented her authority and access to my classified information. Ensign Rodriguez used her sister's classified status to gain unauthorized access to family psychological profiles, medical records, and operational assessments. Secretary Harrison stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who briefs congressional oversight committees on naval operations. The methodology Ensign Rodriguez employed represents a fundamental violation of operational security protocols and constitutes unauthorized psychological warfare against a United States flag officer. But then something completely unexpected happened. The conference room doors opened and my parents walked in, followed by Captain Thompson, and a figure I recognized from classified briefings, Admiral Sarah Chen from Naval Special Operations Command, whose presence meant my family had been granted unprecedented security clearances for this proceeding. I'm sorry to interrupt, my father said, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to deliver testimony that would reshape everything. But we need to address what our family was told about Elena's naval service. Admiral Chen stepped forward, addressing the room with the bearing of someone accustomed to briefing the Joint Chiefs on special operations. Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez were provided false information about Admiral Rodriguez's departure from naval service. They were deliberately deceived about her continued military status and achievements. My mother's voice cracked with emotion as she continued. Carmen told us Elena had been discharged for psychological unfitness. She showed us forged medical reports and convinced us that Elena's claims about continued service were delusions related to PTSD. Captain Thompson opened a classified briefing folder, revealing documents that made several board members lean forward with recognition. For 5 years, Ensign Rodriguez maintained false family liaison authority while conducting unauthorized psychological operations designed to isolate Admiral Rodriguez from civilian support systems. My father looked directly at Carmen with an expression of profound betrayal. She convinced us that believing in Elena's failure was protecting her mental health. We thought we were helping our daughter by accepting her limitations. Secretary Harrison's expression grew serious as he addressed the room. Admiral Rodriguez, on behalf of the United States Navy, I apologize for the unauthorized psychological operations conducted against you and your family. Ensign Rodriguez will face court-martial for violation of operational security, unauthorized intelligence activities, and psychological warfare against a flag officer. Carmen was arrested that afternoon outside the Pentagon's main entrance. The charges included unauthorized access to classified materials, psychological operations against a flag officer, obstruction of naval operations, and violation of the Espionage Act for conducting intelligence activities without proper authorization. As the Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents escorted her past the security checkpoint, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. No longer the ambitious intelligence officer who'd built her career on managing her sister's reputation, just a woman who'd gambled everything on keeping her family's most accomplished member hidden in the shadows. The court-martial proceedings moved with the efficiency of a military justice system designed to protect national security from internal threats. Carmen's systematic manipulation of our family, her unauthorized access to my classified psychological profiles, and her 5-year campaign of psychological warfare against a flag officer painted a picture of calculated betrayal that went far beyond sibling rivalry. Within 3 weeks, she'd been stripped of her commission, discharged from the Navy under other than honorable conditions, and was facing federal prosecution for violations of national security protocols. But the conversation that mattered most happened a week later in my parents' living room, the same living room where they'd expressed disappointment in my supposed failure, where family gatherings had become exercises in managing their shame about their unsuccessful daughter. I sat across from them on the familiar couch, now wearing my admiral's uniform for the first time in their presence, fielding secure calls from Joint Chiefs of Staff and Special Operations commanders who needed to discuss expanding my classified programs. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone. Their daughter, who'd been written off as the family disappointment, now coordinating naval operations that protected American interests worldwide. We kept telling ourselves we were supporting Carmen's naval career, my mother said, her hands wrapped around a tissue that had been damp with tears for the past hour. After you left, after Carmen told us you'd been discharged for psychological problems, we thought encouraging her success was the only way to honor our family's military heritage. My father nodded, his eyes carrying the weight of 5 years' worth of manipulated disappointment. Carmen had documentation, medical reports, official-looking papers that proved you'd been unable to handle naval service. She convinced us that accepting your failure was actually protecting you from further psychological damage. I understand why you believed her, I said, and I meant it. Carmen used classified access and forged documents to build a convincing case. She made my supposed failure look like verified medical fact, backed by official naval assessment. No, my father said firmly. We believed her because it was easier than admitting we didn't understand the complexity of your actual service. When you disappeared into classified operations, we couldn't comprehend that our daughter might be serving at levels we'd never imagined possible. The truth of his words settled between us like a bridge, finally spanning 5 years of engineered separation. My parents hadn't just been disappointed in my supposed failure. They'd been grieving the loss of a daughter they'd been told was broken beyond repair, while celebrating a daughter who'd convinced them she was their only military success. Carmen offered us a simple story to process, my mother continued. One daughter failed, one daughter succeeded. We knew how to be proud of conventional naval achievement. We didn't know how to be proud of something we couldn't discuss, couldn't understand, couldn't even know was happening. I reached across the coffee table and took their hands. You know what destroyed me the most? Not Carmen's psychological manipulation, or the forged medical reports, or even the systematic isolation from family support. It was believing that maybe you were right to be disappointed. Maybe I really had failed at the only thing that mattered to our family. We never want you to doubt your extraordinary service again, my mother said through fresh tears. Not for Carmen, not for us, not for anyone who can't comprehend the sacrifices you've made for national security. The months that followed moved with the momentum of a life finally emerging from deep cover into the recognition it had always deserved. My promotion to Vice Admiral came with assignment to the Pentagon's new Global Special Operations Command, where my classified programs were being expanded to coordinate international counterterrorism efforts. Defense officials who'd never heard of Elena Rodriguez suddenly wanted briefings from the architect of revolutionary special operations methodologies. But the moment that defined everything happened 10 months later, when I stood in the Naval Academy's main auditorium, addressing a brigade of midshipmen who would soon face their own decisions about naval service and family expectations. Through the tall windows I could see the Severn River stretching toward Chesapeake Bay, where so many naval officers had begun journeys that would take them far from everything familiar. The auditorium held over 4,000 future naval officers, many of whom would someday serve in classified operations that required separation from previous identities. My presentation on leadership during deep cover operations was being broadcast to naval installations worldwide, sharing insights that could prepare the next generation for service that demanded extraordinary personal sacrifice. After my presentation, a young female midshipman approached me, maybe 21, wearing the confident bearing of someone destined for naval aviation, with the unmistakable determination of someone who'd already faced family doubts about her chosen path. "Admiral Rodriguez," she said respectfully, "I'm Midshipman Jennifer Martinez, first class. I wanted to ask you something personal about family expectations." I gestured toward the seating area overlooking the memorial garden. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "My family keeps telling me that my goals for naval aviation are unrealistic for someone from our background," she said. "They think my dreams of becoming a test pilot are too ambitious, that I should focus on safer assignments that won't disappoint them if I can't succeed." I looked at her, seeing myself 15 years ago, carrying ambitions that felt too bold for the world she'd grown up in, surrounded by people who confused protection with limitation of possibility. "Midshipman, can I ask you about your specific aviation goals?" Her eyes lit up as she described her plans for test pilot school, the technical challenges of experimental aircraft development, the potential impact of her research on naval aviation safety. She spoke with the precision and passion of someone who'd already begun preparing for extraordinary service. "That's not unrealistic," I told her. "That's exactly what naval aviation needs. The question isn't whether your family understands your potential. It's whether you're brave enough to pursue excellence despite their fears." She nodded, standing taller with renewed confidence. "Did you ever consider accepting their limitations when everyone was telling you to be realistic?" "Every day," I admitted, "but I learned something crucial. The people who love us sometimes try to protect us from failure, but end up protecting us from achieving something extraordinary instead. The only limitations that truly matter are the ones you choose to accept." They used to call me a disappointment, a failed naval officer, someone who couldn't handle military service. What they never understood was that true naval leadership isn't built on meeting conventional expectations or avoiding family disappointment. It's built on the courage to serve at levels that require sacrificing everything familiar, including the understanding of those you love most. I didn't return from deep cover to prove them wrong. I returned because American security depends on officers willing to disappear into classified service without recognition or family comprehension. And now I lead special operations while teaching future naval officers that the greatest honor comes from serving something bigger than family expectations or personal recognition. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.